Hello, everyone. How are you? Happy Tuesday, right? And I'm hoping that everyone had an amazing holiday weekend. And I know that there's more celebrations to come for New Year's Eve. But I just wanted to get this video out before the year ended. And it was really important to do this because this is another video close and dear to my heart, being a California native. So, as you can see, the title of this one is called Shining Light on the Dark-Hued Aboriginals of Pre-Colonial California, Part 1. I realized that doing a two-part series on this one made more sense because this is literally it could be a very long and lengthy video because California is such a big state. And in this particular video, we are going to be focusing on Northern California. Absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know me, many of you don't know me, but I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly to you. And so, my background is pretty extensive when it comes to research. And I was a former journalist and living in Dubai, living across the world, talking to fascinating people. I'm also a candidate for board certification in genealogy. I do a lot of that. I'm also a senior researcher for a heritage focused nonprofit and so many other things in my background. So when I do these videos, I'm doing it from a place of being a bona fide researcher who loves what I do, who just gets so much enjoyment out of it. And I'm also a fact checker. I'm also one of those people that believes that if you're going to put something out on daily, weekly, monthly basis on this platform here, that you really should have your facts and you really should be able to back them up. So I'm coming from a place of wanting to share with people what I've learned, what I'm learning, and in having new conversations around North America. My heritage is also my family's from North Carolina and Kentucky, so I've done an incredible amount of research on my family and also the history of this country, so that I can understand how we fit into this whole landscape. So I just wanted to give you a little bit about background about myself so that you guys know I'm not just a person who's picked up a mic and just decided to do videos, although that's okay too, I guess. But the summary today of what we're going to be talking about is the ancient Asiatics. We'll start off going there. We'll talk about Montezuma for a little bit because it's tied to California and also to part two. I also want to get deep and start talking about the dark-hued Aboriginals of California that we don't hear very much about. The tribes are still in existence, but in terms of who these people were pre-colonial times, we don't hear enough about them. And then I'm going to give you guys, of course, as always, final thoughts with a focus on law and civics. Okay? So, the ancient Asiatics. This is so important to me because one of the things I think that we do when we talk about history, we talk about it often from the place in which we are today. And we'll look at photos, we'll look at documentaries and movies and things of that nature. And we think that this is the reality. But in truth, we haven't even scratched the surface, right? And I know that in this short presentation, I won't even be scratching the surface myself, but I'm scratching the surface myself. But I also know that from a image standpoint, I think it's important to remind everyone who we are and where we've come from so that we do not forget. And one of the things I want to do is show you guys some imagery of some of the ancient Asiatics as we know them to be, but also some of us don't see these images enough. And when we start talking about migrations and talking about who the first peoples were of America, I think it's important to know that, again, I'm going to say this repeatedly, America was an incredibly diverse country even before the colonial period. And there's so much evidence pointing towards that. And we need to be really honest about that. So, and I always go back to when I look at the imageries such as this one from Cambodia, I say, okay, these people obviously were honoring themselves. They weren't just creating images of deities from their dreams. They were actually creating images of people that they saw every day, or what they believed to be themselves, right? And this is just examples of this. As you can see, there's other examples throughout Southeast Asia, from Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, all this, iconic imagery that we sometimes forget about. Um, and all of these have different dates on them. I won't go into BC, AD, and all of that, but I just wanted to show you guys the imagery that we sometimes don't always see when it comes to talking about the ancient Asiatics. Again, we see more religious imagery out of Vietnam, out of Laos, the 17th century bronze statue. Again, these are images of people that we don't see very often, but I wanted to remind you guys of this, particularly as we start talking about the ancient people who were here in North America. And I found this really interesting clip. You see this really tall man. He's like 7'5". Okay. And he is from what was then called Mongolia, right? And he was photographed here in 1922. But this, interestingly, was from the National Geographic magazine, but they never published this photo, right? But they have this photo. And as you can see in the background, there's other, Aboriginal Mongolians in the background. So when we talk about the Bering Strait theory, the Bering Strait dynamic of the first peoples coming to America, we tend to still think of those individuals as the ones that we are seeing today. And I'm here to tell you that not necessarily. So, again, these are dark peoples who came from these countries in ancient times, and it's important to acknowledge that and recognize that. So let's talk about Montezuma for a little bit. And the reason why I want to talk about him is because he is such an important figure in history. And, you could do an 8-hour lecture on Montezuma just on that, because the Aztec Empire was pretty vast. There's a pretty incredible empire here. And Montezuma was born in 1466 and died on June 30th, 1520, in what we now know to be as Mexico City. And he was actually the ninth Aztec emperor of Mexico. So this particular empire, Aztecan Empire, spans a great deal of time. And again, I won't go into all of that, but I just wanted to take and ground everyone in a period of history that is very, very relevant to the peoples I'm going to be talking about in California. And as you can see, Montezuma's reign spanned from 1502 to 1520. Now, the population of the Aztec Empire was pretty substantial, and estimated numbers range from 5 to 6 million people. That's pretty intense, right? And this includes not only the core of the Aztec civilization in the Valley of Mexico, but also the various territories and tributary states under Aztec influence. So when you think about this and you really think about Montezuma and his reign, he was over and pretty much, I guess you could say, when you say 5 to 6 million people, think of like New York City almost. It's pretty, a lot of people. But of course, the most famous thing that Montezuma is known for is his confrontation with Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez. Yes, Montezuma was initially, he initially welcomed Cortez when he came, but he really realized that this is not a friendly visit. And he tried to buy him off, right? But Montezuma knew that that probably wasn't going to work, and it didn't work. And what happened was he ended up basically laying a trap for them in the capital city. Now, Cortez, for his part, like most of the conquistadors, were not there for friendly visits. They were there to conquer, which is conquistador. That's that's what he's there to do. He's there to conquer, there to take whatever he can. He wasn't just there to get gold, although that's a common story. But let's be honest, he was there to take over, right? So what ends up happening, long story short, Cortez realizes he's being set up and he takes Montezuma as a prisoner, hoping to prevent an Aztec attack because Cortez believed that if he took Montezuma prisoner, that the people of the empire would not attack him. But of course, that is not true. So what happened instead was that the Aztecs turned on Montezuma because they felt that he had betrayed them by being friendly and trying to create an alliance with Cortez. It's a very intriguing story. Again, it's like an 8-hour presentation in itself, and I'm summarizing it. Um, so what ends up happening is Aztecs end up turning on Montezuma. He later dies, and they go after Cortez too. It was pretty bloody, but we'll talk about that for another time. But I just wanted to give you guys kind of like a quick rundown of Montezuma and give you some grounding as to the time frame. Now, again, here's a map, and you guys know I love my maps. What you see here is basically where the Aztec Empire was in relation to North America. Now, let's keep in mind something. This is around the early 1500s, right? So Montezuma and the Aztec Empire are already on and popping, okay? Before we even have British colonies. Just keeping that real. And if you're talking about millions of people in just this region alone, you can only imagine what his influence was throughout the rest of the North America. And the reason I'm trying to keep it focused without bringing in all these other stories is because I want you guys to see this map, and I want you guys to understand that, again, there were established empires in North America long before the colonists came along. You know, when we say that we were always here, that's what we mean. We were here, here, here. These were long established empires that had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So, with all that intrigue going on, you can also imagine that you had other areas where there were Aboriginals trying to create life, trying to create their own, their own kingdoms and empires in their own way, right? But I just wanted to show you guys a map. Now, of course, this map, it will always be changing. Maps will always be changing, but this gives you an idea from a visual perspective what was happening and how things were kind of spread out during that time. Now, getting to the core and the crux of the discussion, the dark-hued Aboriginals of California. Again, this is so near and dear to me because I want to make sure, as much as I can in my capacity, to put the dark-hued Aboriginal front and center because we are being disappeared and people are saying we didn't exist, we didn't really contribute as much. And I mean, there's so much that's been coming out that we have, but still, the way the history is being taught now, we are still kind of being relegated to the bottom rung of society. Now, from the period of 1501 to 1837, the exploration and discovery of North America's western border spanned 336 years. And I use that word discovery very loosely because discovery is always an interesting word because it's not that anyone really discovered these places. It's just that the conquistadors and other colonialists didn't, they just didn't know they existed. But folks had been doing their own thing long before they came along. So I use that term very loosely, but from the perspective of the colonialists, colonists, whatever, this is their perspective and how they came to these spaces because it was all new to them. But this is a span of time, at least in terms of the West Coast, I'm saying West Coast is a very modern term, but the borders of North America on the western side. Okay, now I created this map because I wanted to again show you guys visually where most of these Aboriginals were residing. Now, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many, many different tribes that existed in California, particularly Northern California. But as you can see, they were all throughout Northern California in various areas, from the tip of Northern California and the Crescent City, Redding area, all the way down to San Jose and San Francisco. And some of these places, for those of you who live in California or have lived in California, will notice and recognize these areas: Bodega Bay, Crescent City, Drake's Bay. And one of the things that I find really, really interesting about this is that most of these areas that they resided in were by the rivers, bays, and the ocean. They really, really were in alignment with nature and making sure that they were on the water, which is so, so important to the Aboriginal tribes. So, yes, this is a list for you guys to look over. Now, of course, going back to quote unquote those who discovered and explored California, there was one man in particular by the name of Charles Pickering who wrote a book called The Races of Man and Their Geographical Distribution. And this particular book, he talked about or made observations about all the different tribes that he saw. And to quote, he said, "The Californians, therefore, he, meaning Pickering, calls Malays, and the inhabitants of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, he classifies as Mongolians. Californians, in the eyes of this traveler, differ from their northern neighbors in complexion and their physicality." Now, I'm saying physicality, but that's what he meant. So, this particular, you know, I guess you could say researcher, ethnologist, was very specific about what he saw and where he was. And many of these people, again, they traveled and sometimes lived with the tribes. Now, he goes on to say that the skin of the Malay of the Polynesian islands and that of the Californian are alike, soft and very dark. Now, visually, I'm going to show you on the map what he did. He basically broke down who he classified as the Mongolians living in certain areas like Vancouver Island, BC, Washington, and Oregon. And then he classified the Californians as looking more like the Malays. And to give you perspective, this is one of the last tribes or Aboriginal people in Malaysia right now. And this particular Aboriginal group in Malaysia are quickly, quickly disappearing. And they've actually suffered some kind of mysterious deaths, ranging from strange diseases to water pollution to various things. And it's quite sad because after they disappear, what happens? So when Pickering was comparing Malays to those of California, he was referring to people like this who look like these particular tribes in Malaysia. And so I also am going to be quoting another book called The Pacific States of North America by Hubert, Howe, Bancroft. And Bancroft did a lot of research. I mean, his book is pretty extensive. And he quotes, I mean, at least a good, I don't know, 100 to 150 books and other publications of different, ethnologists, researchers, scientists, and people who just traveled up and down California making the observation of the races. So I will be referencing a lot of the quotes that are coming from this particular book. So, for instance, we see here in the Humboldt County area by Redwood Creek is the tribe called the Cholula. Quote, "The Cholula bury their dead. Like most of the coast tribes, they are very dark colored, squat in stature, rather fuller faced than the interior Indians, guttural in their speech, and characterized by hideous and incredible superstitions, and a belief in the almost universal diabolism of nature." And on the right, this woman was they called her Mrs. Molasses, and they took a picture of her in 1912. Yeah, the Cholula. Now, again, like I'm saying, this is a really brief overview of many of the tribes, and I'm doing my best to honor them. But there's so many, but you could be doing an 8-hour lecture, like I said, on all of them. Also, in the area of Crescent City, which is located in Del Norte County, the other description, Mr. Powers noted he saw some broad faced squaws of an almost African blackness. Now, this is how they describe them, and some of these descriptions are not very kind because when it comes to the colonists, they tend to look down on us, and it also is reflected in their writings about how they described us. Again, there's more descriptions of the Potawatots in the vicinity of Mad River and Humboldt Bay. And this particular quote, those in Humboldt Bay are black skinned, pudgy in stature, well cushioned with adipose tissue. So as you can see the map on the right, it shows you where a lot of the tribes were, the Patawat, the Wiki, and the Wiyot. It's pretty intense. It's just so fascinating. Again, we moved down to Sonoma County and Bodega Bay. And, quote, at Bodega Bay, they are an ugly and brutish race, many with Negro profiles. They are physically an inferior race and have flat, I meant to put flat, unmeaning features, long, coarse, straight black hair, big mouths, and very dark skins. So, again, not very, there's no beauty in the descriptions of the Aboriginals. They're very demeaning, very, very demeaning. Sacramento Valley, again, we're in Sacramento County. More descriptions. Many of them are diminutive in stature, but they do not lack muscular strength. And we saw some who were tall and well formed. Their complexion is a dark mahogany, are often nearly black. Their face is round or square, with features approximating nearer to the African than the Indian. Wide, enormous mouth, nose is nearly flat, and hair straight, black, and coarse. It's interesting how they went from valley to valley, place to place, county to county, and pretty much have the same descriptions. Now here we are in Drakes Bay, Marin County. Now it's interesting because Drakes Bay is, I've never been there myself, but it's literally, I mean, if you go there today, it's kind of a prominent place if you can get there, right? How they're described here, the Aboriginals, ugly, stupid. Now, I keep in mind, I left these descriptions in there so that you guys can see what was said word for word about the Aboriginals. And it ties back to what I've always said about how we are disappearing, how we are demeaned, how we are devalued, and it continues today. It's really not any different. You have people who are still talking about the Aboriginals and the Dark-Hued people like this today. So, quote, is ugly, stupid, and savage. Otherwise, they are well formed, tolerably tall, and of a dark brown complexion. The women are short and very ugly. They have much of the Negro in their countenance, very long, smooth, and coal black hair. And we move on to the Klamath River, which is in North Carolina. And this particular tribe is the Yurok. Now, the Northern Californians around the Klamath Lakes and the Klamath, Trinity, and Rogue Rivers are tall, muscular, and well made, with a complexion varying from nearly black to light brown in proportion to their proximity to or distance from the ocean or other large bodies of water. The women are short, and some of them quite handsome, even in the Caucasian sense of the word. Thank you very much, colonist. Right? So, of course, I'm sorry, I'm adding my adding my commentary, but again, this is how we were described by them. In the Yosemite Valley, again, they are very dark colored, and they just say some pretty harsh things about us. But I also didn't want to taint any of my research by you were removing these quotes or altering them or leaving them out. Because again, if you go back to doing the research yourselves, and I will be providing the links to all of these resources, you'll see this information for yourself. But these are the Aboriginals of Yosemite Valley. Now, this is the Ohlone tribe, and I found this to be particularly interesting because the Ohlones are one of the tribes that are still in existence. Many of the tribes are still in existence and are had to merge with others over the years for various reasons related to colonialism and murder and all of that. Um, Again, they talk about how ugly and stupid and savage they are. They talk about just they're just very insulting. So, but at Santa Clara, they talk and they say they are of a blackish color. They have flat faces, thick lips, and black, coarse, straight hair. Right. Now, this was another interesting one. Dance of the Ohlone Indians at Mission in San Jose, New California. And one of the interesting thing, and I don't really have a lot of time to go into the missions, but that was a really big part of what was happening to when it came to the tribes, where missions were built to convert the Aboriginals to Christianity and to Catholicism, and basically, make them better humans, if you will, because they had ways and religious practices that were foreign to the colonists. So they were trying to, make them like the colonists. So, but the missions were very specific. And I want to call them, they were kind of re-education centers is what I would call them. I wouldn't even call them missions. That sounds too, benevolent and kind, but they weren't kind. We know what the missions were really there for. And this was drawn in 1803 by William von Tellenau. Really interesting. And you guys have probably seen this before, this particular sketch before. There's another one, the three Ohlone Indians in a Tule, I think I'm saying that correctly, Tule boat. And this was painted by Louis Choris in 1822. Now, here's a group of the Ohlone tribe in San Francisco, and this was taken back in 2018. Members of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe attended proclamation of the first official Indigenous Peoples Day in San Francisco, October 2018. So, as you can see, they look very different from the Aboriginals of California from the early 14th, 15th, 16th century. They look really different, right? Now, there's all kinds of conjecture as to why they look different, but they look different. And so, again, I want to stress this point that, again, we will look at the quote unquote Native Americans of today or the indigenous people of today and say, oh, well, that's what they look like. Oh, you guys aren't indigenous because you don't look like them. Well, naturally, we don't look like them because we're, for one, all different complexions, as you can see in this photo. And then two, we are also, we've been taught to not be taught that diversity. We're not shown. And one of the things I think that's really interesting when I go to heritage centers and museums across the country is the dark-hued Aboriginal he's almost hidden from view. Like, you don't see him. It's almost like you start from like the 19th century or the 18th century and that's it. You don't go further back. And that's what really gets on my nerves, particularly as a researcher, because you're just leaving out a whole just swath of research and not telling the whole story. And I know that there's some shame associated with that because we do have to talk about that thing called colonization and what that wrought, particularly for the women and the women who were violated violently everywhere all the time. And now here you have unfortunately, you have descendants of the colonists. But that's a whole nother video. I mean, it's deep stuff. It's deep, deep, deep. So, my final thoughts on this particular presentation. We went by this one pretty quickly, didn't we? But I want to say this, and you guys will see as I continue to do more videos that when we talk about heritage and we talk about the future of our families, we have to start moving a little bit differently. We have to start moving in a space of knowledge and, quite frankly, getting our information together and doing our own research. Because if you don't do your own research, you're going to continually repeating a story that may or may not be you. And when it comes to justice, when it comes to fighting for your people, fighting for the past so that it can affect the present and the future, you are going to have to do the legwork. You're going to have to do the work. And so when I talk about law and civics, most of our battles have been fought by holding individuals to task. And that comes through law. It comes through, yeah, you got to get your paperwork together. And you can't just say, oh, well, I've suffered an injustice because I'm an African American. No, you have to prove that that injustice occurred, right? And that's how you get that battle. That's how you win those battles. They are long and they are, my goodness, it takes forever, just decades often, to win, if you will, your case in court. So when you think about fighting for the justice of your people, you have to go and get real with it and get legal with it, right? So that's why I always talk about laying your groundwork, because you can call yourself anything that you want to call yourself, quite frankly, and it's based on your genealogy, based on your research for your family. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be about getting the paperwork. I'm going to be real with you. That's why I'm going to always be stressing genealogy. There will be future videos where I show you guys my process, and I will show you ways in which you can do your genealogy and find those difficult records, find those difficult records to locate and things of that nature. Because it's really going to boil down to how much you study and how much you get this information and do your research. Because ultimately, you want to become your family's historian. That's what you want to do. You want to be a walking expert in your family. Because I'm going to tell you something, and I so am hoping that I can get an interview with Kavan Ward of whereismyland.org. We did request an interview with her. Hopefully we hear back from her in 2024. But one of the things I really appreciate about her organization is she is helping families to fight the injustices that have occurred to their families by saying, okay, who took your family's land? What happened to your family? What was the story? What's the story? One of the most infamous cases is Bruce's Beach, where in here in Los Angeles, they returned the land to the family after decades of work. The family ended up giving back the land to Los Angeles simply because the you know the county had written so many covenants in the law that they couldn't really do anything with the land from a private standpoint. They, yes, they could turn it into a public park, all of those things, and that's how they end up taking your land in the first place. They know that your ancestors will eventually come back for it, and then they change the laws again, so they make it really difficult for you to get what you initially had desired in the first place. So, but any guys, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm saying that Where's My Land is such an important organization because it always boils down to your genealogy. It always boils down to the paperwork. It always boils down to what you can prove and what you can obtain for the future, for your family. That's why I stress people to do their research and not just have a whole bunch of opinions and feelings and conjecture, because really that's not going to help you win these battles. What's going to help you win these battles is knowing your law, knowing the civics. And as you guys know, you walk into a courtroom, what does the judge often say? When you say, I don't know, well, what they say, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And it is so true. So I want us to start moving with more focus on research, erudition, making sure that we are walking in 100, sometimes it's not always 100%, but walking in as much truth as we can to fight for our families, to fight for whatever was taken from them. And that is why I do so much research, so I can help people, so that I can also say, okay, well, sure, you can be an African American or Aboriginal or whatever, but really when it comes on down to it, it stops and ends there, because when it comes to law and fighting for justice, that's not why you're going to win a case. That's not why you're going to get your family's land back because you're African American. You're going to get that land back because of the paperwork, because of what you can prove. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that. And keep in mind something: history is not necessarily your story. You can read a history book all day, but is that history in that history book your story? Now, you could say some of it is, but the history is not necessarily representative of your story. We are all unique. We're all unique. And our history is like a fingerprint. It's unique to us. Our stories are unique to us. So I always want to say, do as much research as you can and be deep divers. Really, really. So with all that being said, I don't want to take up too much time, guys. You know how I can rant. But I just want to say, firstly, thank you, thank you, thank you immensely for all your amazing support, all of the comments, all of the likes. And I read everything. I read all the comments. I love when people are intelligent and share their stories and their comments. It really, really fuels this discussion. And I want to also say I read the negative comments too. I do. And what the negative comments do in particular is they fuel my passion. Because when I read the negative comments, I think, oh well, I need to do a video on that. So right now, I have a running list of videos I'm going to do for all the objections that I receive as well. So thank you. Thank you, negative commenters. I get a lot of ideas from your comments too, so keep them coming. So because the videos aren't going to stop and the research isn't going to stop. And I am going to do research that's going to make people feel uncomfortable, or I'm going to tell you things that you hadn't heard before. I'm going to say things that go against maybe even how you perceived yourself, how you perceive your own tribe, how you perceive your own family for that matter. So these things are real, and I'm not going to mince the words. So, and in any case, you guys have an amazing, amazing week. Hopefully, I'll be able to drop another video. I might be compelled to. There's a couple of other videos I want to drop too, but be looking for part two. Be looking for that really soon, which will cover again the southern part of California and the Aboriginals from there. So again, thank you guys so much for listening and being here today. And let's just keep learning. I'll talk to you soon.